The first time my aunt called me a paper pusher, I let it pass. The second time, I smiled into my water glass and counted the exits. The third time, my cousin Nathan stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. That was how my family finally learned that the woman they had mocked for 22 years was not a secretary. My name is Mara Voss. At home, I was the quiet niece who worked some kind of desk job near the Pentagon. In their stories, I answered phones, organized binders, arranged travel, and spent my days making other people important. In the world I actually lived in, my call sign was Sentinel-6. I was the senior intelligence officer who coordinated Task Force Nightglass, a classified interagency cell whose decisions moved special operations teams, drones, surveillance aircraft, satellite windows, and sometimes entire carrier groups. I had authorized missions that made foreign governments tremble. I had canceled strikes with seconds left because a thermal image showed children near the target. I had negotiated a hostage extraction in Syria while bleeding through my sleeve after shrapnel tore through my arm. Presidents took calls when my line rang. But in my Aunt Marjorie's dining room, I was still the disappointing daughter of a dead soldier. The woman who hid behind paperwork. The woman who had no husband, no children, no visible glory, and no proof of usefulness that my family could understand. That Thanksgiving, I was 43 years old, exhausted, pale from 3 nights without sleep, wearing a plain gray sweater because I had come straight from Andrews after a situation nobody at that table was cleared to know existed. My old Ford Taurus was parked between my cousin Nathan's black truck and Aunt Marjorie's new Mercedes. The Taurus had a cracked taillight and coffee stains on the passenger seat. Marjorie mentioned it before dessert. Mara, sweetheart," she said, cutting her turkey into pieces so small they looked punished. "Does the Pentagon not pay secretaries enough to buy a decent car?" My uncle coughed into his napkin. My mother froze. Nathan did not laugh. That was new. Nathan Hayes was Marjorie's son, a Navy SEAL lieutenant commander, golden boy of every family gathering, the man she had spent 3 decades polishing into a shrine. When Nathan entered a room, Marjorie became 20 years younger. When I entered, she became a judge. I took a sip of water. "It runs." Marjorie smiled. "So does a lawnmower." A few cousins laughed because they had been trained to survive by joining whichever cruelty controlled the room. I set the glass down. I could feel Nathan watching me. He had been watching since I arrived. Not the way men watch women. The way operators watch exits. He had noticed my hands. The scar near my collarbone. The way I sat with my back near a wall. The way I placed the butter knife parallel to the edge of the plate with the handle angled toward my dominant hand. Little things. Invisible to civilians. Loud to someone who had lived through doors being kicked open. Marjorie continued, "It is not shameful to be administrative, dear. Someone has to arrange binders while people like Nathan do the dangerous work." My mother whispered, "Marjorie, please." There it was again. Please. Not stop. Not apologize. Just please, meaning be cruel more quietly. I loved my mother. But her silence had been the wallpaper of my childhood. Always present. Never questioned. My father died when I was 15. Colonel Elias Voss. Army intelligence. Killed in an operation whose details remained classified long enough for rumor to rot around the truth. At his funeral in Arlington, while the flag on his casket was still folded in my mother's lap, Marjorie leaned toward her sister and said, "This is what stubbornness buys." He should have gone into real estate with Howard. I heard her. I never forgot. My mother pretended she had not. That was the day I learned some people call peace whatever keeps them from defending you. Marjorie had always needed my father to be wrong. His service, his secrecy, his refusal to turn his connections into money. If Elias Voss had been honorable, then her husband's little empire of shopping centers and golf partnerships looked smaller. If he had died for something real, then her life of safe cruelty seemed cheap. So she rewrote him. Reckless, stubborn, poor provider, dead because he wanted a uniform more than a family. And when I joined the service, then intelligence, then disappeared into the classified machinery of national security, she rewrote me too. Paper girl, office soldier, pog. She liked that one after Nathan taught it to her. Person other than grunt. The first time she called me that, Nathan laughed. He was 26 then. I was 30. He had just come home from a deployment and still carried the swagger of a man applauded by every room he entered. I had been working 18-hour shifts on an operation that kept 3 of his teams alive, including one he would later receive a medal for. He did not know that. He was not cleared to know. So I let him laugh. That was the cost of my work. You learn to swallow credit until it stops having taste. At Thanksgiving, Marjorie raised her wine glass. To Nathan, she said, "Still doing real service?" The table echoed the toast. Real service? The words landed in my chest with old precision. I had held men's last transmissions in my headset. I had told teams to wait while bullets hit concrete around them because the overhead feed was not clean. I had sent people into rooms and then lived with the silence afterward. But none of that had a photograph for the mantle. None of it came with a story Aunt Marjorie could brag about at church. So it did not count. Nathan did not raise his glass. His eyes remained on me. "What's your billet now?" he asked. The room went awkward. He had never asked me a real question at dinner. I wiped my mouth with a napkin. Analysis and coordination. Marjorie laughed. "See? Folders?" Nathan did not look at her. "What kind of coordination?" "The kind I can't discuss." That should have ended it. It did not. He leaned back slowly. "Where?" "Various locations. Command level?" I looked at him. "Nathan." His face changed. "Not much." "Enough. You said my name like you were warning me." The table went silent in pieces. Forks stopped. Glasses lowered. Marjorie frowned. "What is this nonsense?" Nathan's voice dropped. "Do you have a call sign?" I felt my mother inhale. She did not know it either. Not the real one. No one at that table did. I had protected them from my life partly because I had to, partly because I was tired of offering truth to people who preferred the version of me that kept them comfortable. "Nathan," I said, "leave it alone." He stood. Not fully, just enough that his body forgot Thanksgiving and remembered briefing rooms. "Answer me." Marjorie snapped. "Sit down. You are not interrogating your cousin over her office job." Nathan's eyes did not move from mine. "Call sign?" I could have lied. I had lied for years. Administrative liaison. Strategic support. Interagency scheduling. Words soft enough to be ignored. But something in me was finished. Maybe it was the toast. Maybe it was my mother's eyes on her plate again. Maybe it was the memory of my father under the flag while Marjorie called sacrifice stubbornness. I placed my napkin on the table. "Sentinel 6. Nathan went completely still. Then he stood to attention. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Professional. Immediate. The room did not understand the movement, but it felt the temperature change. Marjorie looked up at him. "Nathan, what are you doing?" He swallowed. "Ma'am." The word was addressed to me, not his mother, not the table, me. My aunt blinked as if someone had slapped her. I said quietly, at ease. He did not sit. His face had gone pale beneath his tan. "You're Sentinel 6? "Yes." "The Sentinel 6? "There are not several," my cousin Daniel whispered. "What does that mean?" Nathan finally looked at the table. "It means all of you should stop talking." Marjorie's mouth opened. He cut her off. "Especially you, Mom." The room froze. I had never heard him speak to her like that. Marjorie's face hardened. "Explain yourself." Nathan looked sick. "She's not a secretary. She's one of the highest level intelligence assets in the hemisphere. People like me do not get direct access to people like her unless the world is already on fire." My aunt laughed once. "No." Nathan's voice sharpened. "She has clearance levels that do not have names in ordinary channels. If her phone rings, commanders answer. If she speaks in an operations room, people with stars shut up and listen." Marjorie looked at me with pure refusal. "That is impossible." I stood. Not because I needed to prove anything. Because sitting down suddenly felt like continuing a lie. "I do not answer phones, Aunt Marjorie," I said. "I make them ring. And when I make them ring, presidents answer." No one breathed. It was an arrogant sentence. I knew that. But sometimes truth sounds arrogant to people who built their confidence on your silence. Marjorie gripped the edge of the table. "You expect us to believe you command presidents?" "No, I expect nothing from you." Nathan turned toward his mother fully now. "Do you understand what you have been doing? Do you understand who you have been mocking?" She sorts intelligence files. She saved my team in Mosul. The words struck me harder than I expected. I looked at him. Nathan's voice roughened. 2014. We were pinned in a compound. We thought command had abandoned us because the extraction window disappeared. Someone rerouted drone coverage, delayed an airstrike, and forced a ground approach through an alley everyone else marked unsafe. We lost one man instead of all 8. He stared at me. "That was you." I remembered the operation. The heat signatures, the argument with Air Command, the child running into the strike zone, the way my hand hovered over authorization and then refused. "Yes." Nathan sat down as if his legs had failed. Marjorie whispered, "But you said she was administrative?" He looked at his mother with something like disgust. "I said POG when I was young and stupid. You made it a theology." For a long moment, the only sound was the old clock above the buffet. Then my mother began to cry. Softly, silently, the way she had cried most of my life. But this time, I could not comfort her first. I looked at Marjorie. "Do you remember Arlington?" Her face changed. "Just a little." "Good." She remembered. "You told my mother my father died because he was stubborn." "Mara, you said his sacrifice was a waste because he did not choose money." I was grieving. "No," I said. "You were competing with a dead man." Nathan flinched. My mother covered her mouth. I continued. "You could not stand that my father had something your husband's money could not buy, so you made his honor sound foolish. Then you spent 28 years making my life sound small because you needed Nathan to stand on a platform built from my failure." Marjorie's voice shook. "That is cruel." "Yes," I said. "It is. But unlike you, I waited until it was true. That ended dinner. Not immediately. People sat for several minutes after the words, as if waiting for someone to announce that the play was over and they could become a family again. But families built on silence do not return after truth enters. They rearrange. Nathan followed me onto the porch. Cold air hit my face. I had spent half my life in rooms without windows, staring at screens where people became signals and decisions became timestamps. The night outside felt almost unreal. Nathan stood beside me. I owe you an apology. You owe me several. He nodded. You're right. That surprised me. He looked older than he had at dinner. Not in the face. In the certainty, I was arrogant, he said. I let Mom turn my service into a weapon against yours. You didn't know. I knew enough to be better. That was the first time I respected him as a man instead of a resume. I leaned against the railing. You were good in Mosul. He looked at me quickly. You watched? I watched everyone. Did I make mistakes? Yes. He almost smiled. Are you going to tell me what they were? No. Classified. No. Character building. He laughed once, then looked away. Thank you. I knew which mission he meant. I nodded. You're welcome. We stood there until the cold made my scar ache. The scar was from Syria, a negotiation that became a firefight. 3 hostages, 2 hostile factions, a broken interpreter link. I had moved from a secure vehicle because the man holding the hostages would only speak to the woman on the radio. Shrapnel tore into my upper arm when the outer wall took fire. I kept talking for 17 minutes after that. All 3 hostages came out alive. The official report mentioned coordination efficiency. That is what classified bravery often becomes. Efficiency. When I went back inside, my mother was waiting near the kitchen. Marjorie had locked herself in the guest room. The rest of the family had scattered into whispers. My mother held a dish towel in both hands. I didn't know, she said. I know. You never told me. You never asked in a way that wanted the answer. That hurt her. I did not apologize. For years, I had treated her fragility like a law of nature. But fragility can become a shield if no one ever asks who is bleeding behind it. She sat at the kitchen table. I thought if I kept things calm, we would survive. We did not stay calm. We stayed quiet. She nodded, crying harder. I let her hurt you. Yes. I let her hurt your father's memory. Yes. I was afraid of losing the only family we had left. I looked toward the hallway where Marjorie had disappeared. And did keeping her protect us? My mother had no answer. That was the beginning of her honesty. Not a speech. Not a dramatic apology. Just the absence of the old lie. The story did not end that night. Stories rarely end where people on the outside think they should. Marjorie did not apologize for months. At first, she tried denial, then minimization. Then she called Nathan ungrateful. Then she called me dangerous. That one was true, at least. But her power over the family had cracked. Once a room sees the trick, the magician becomes a person holding string. Nathan changed first. He stopped letting her narrate his life. He stopped allowing her to turn his medals into proof that everyone else was lesser. He asked me questions. Careful questions. Respectful questions. Some I could answer. Most I could not. But the asking mattered. A year later, I was promoted to colonel. 3 years after that, brigadier general. The ceremony was smaller than Marjorie would have wanted and larger than I deserved. Nathan came. My mother came. Marjorie did not. She sent flowers with no note. I kept them for 3 days before throwing them away. I was not angry. I simply had no use for flowers that could not say what they meant. The call came 2 winters later. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Marjorie had always imagined herself dying dramatically. I think, surrounded by people forced to admit she had been central to everything. But illness has a way of stripping theater down to furniture, medication schedules, and fear. Nathan asked if I would visit. He did not pressure me. That mattered. I went on a Thursday. Marjorie was in a hospital bed by the window of her house, thinner than cruelty had ever allowed her to look. Her hair was wrapped in a scarf. Her hands rested on the blanket like small pale birds. For the first time, she looked less powerful than her own furniture. "Mara," she said. "Aunt Marjorie, I suppose you came to see me humbled." "No." "Then why?" I looked at the woman who had spent most of my life trying to make me smaller. I searched for hatred. There was some old, but not strong. Mostly I felt tired. I came because Nathan asked, and because I did not want your voice to be the last version of you in my head. She closed her eyes. "That sounds like your father." "You hated that about me." "Yes." The honesty startled me. She opened her eyes again. "I hated it because it made me feel ordinary." I sat down. The room smelled of antiseptic and lavender lotion. She continued, "Your father never needed applause. Neither did you. Nathan did. I did. I thought if you were seen, he would vanish. He is your son, not your trophy. I know that now. Do you?" Her mouth trembled. I made him proud and afraid at the same time. That was the truest sentence she had ever spoken. Then she said, "I called you small because I knew you were not." I did not forgive her in that moment. Not completely. Forgiveness is not a door that swings open just because someone dying finally tells the truth. But something loosened. Not for her. For me. "I will not carry your poison after you are gone," I said. Tears slid into her hairline. "Is that forgiveness?" "No, it is release." She nodded. "That may be more than I deserve." "It is." She almost smiled. Still sharp, still true. When she died 6 weeks later, I attended the funeral. I stood beside Nathan. My mother held my hand. No one gave a speech about Marjorie being kind. That would have been a lie. Instead, Nathan spoke about consequences, about love twisted by pride, about how admiration becomes dangerous when it needs someone else to be inferior. It was the bravest thing I had heard him say. Years later, at West Point, I stood in front of a lecture hall full of cadets who looked young enough to still believe strength would announce itself clearly. They expected stories. Combat. Operations. Perhaps a sanitized version of glory. I gave them none of that. I told them character is what you do when the lights are off. When no one can post it. When no one can thank you. When the report will be sealed, the mission unnamed, the sacrifice misfiled as efficiency. I told them the world does not need everyone on a billboard. Success does not always require an audience. Sometimes the person keeping the room alive is the one nobody notices. The one at the console. The one checking the feed. The one refusing the strike because a child walked into the frame. The one everyone at Thanksgiving thinks answers phones. A cadet raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do you live with people never knowing what you did?" I looked at her for a long moment. I thought of my father, my mother's silence, Nathan standing to attention. Marjorie in the hospital bed, the hostages in Syria, the team in Mosul, all the names I could never say. You decide whether recognition is your fuel or your tax. I said, if it is your fuel, you will starve in secret work. If it is your tax, you pay it and keep moving. The room was quiet. Good. Quiet can be useful when it is chosen honestly. After the lecture, I walked past portraits of generals whose names history had been allowed to keep. Mine would probably be kept too, eventually. Rank has a way of making people visible after years of invisibility. But I no longer needed the visibility the way I once thought I did. My aunt had spent years believing she could make me small by refusing to see me. She was wrong. A person does not become small because others lack the clearance to understand their size. My father knew that. It took me longer. I spent most of my life guarding doors no one knew existed. I kept watch while other people slept. I carried secrets that could topple governments and pain that could not survive one honest family dinner. And I learned that power does not always arrive wearing a medal. Sometimes it arrives exhausted, in a gray sweater, driving an old Ford Taurus, sitting quietly at the table while fools mistake silence for absence. I was never absent. I was listening. I was watching. I was making the phones ring. And when the right people answered, the world moved.